Hey everybody, Steve Cavey here with our Think Tank series. It's been an amazing journey. Sent out a little invitation to a bunch of my friends and colleagues and people that I admire, and had so many people reply back that we ended up with 2 months full of think tanks and three people per think tank session. And that's been a really cool thing because we never put people together for any reason other than what date worked for them. And then we said, okay, come in and share for a few minutes. And then after you share for a few minutes each, let's break up into small groups, have a conversation, come on back, and let's take the conversation further. While we're doing that, our guests get to talk to each other about connections with their little group as a little group while we're in breakouts. They're in their own breakout, so to speak. And we come back and we have a nice conversation. It's 90 minutes. We don't have a rush. We can dive in and really kind of go where we need to go with the conversation. And that's been really wonderful. And I'm at Bowling Green State University. I am blessed to have a master's in organization development and change program that I get to teach in, along with our doctorate in organization development and change programs. And I'm currently director of that program. And we have just an amazing group of human beings that come together, just like you all, birds of a feather flock together. There's a central core thing that everybody cares about. What brings you all here is the same. I mean, as you imagine, what brought everybody here, there's something that if you were together, you would obviously have a wonderful dinner if you were out and about. And so this is a little bit of that. We get a taste of that from people from all over the world, which is awesome as well. In addition to the Bowling Green State University, we have the Academy of Management OD&C division, who is also co-sponsoring and a part of this with us. And I'm really grateful for that because the OD&C division really values the scholar practitioner bridge and advancing the theory and practice and evidence behind this human-centric work that we do. And so I'm grateful for that. And David's here today, which is great because he was a big part of helping that be connected. So thank you for that, David. And do you want to say anything from the Academy at all? Other than you're on mute.
There we go. Oh, I just am grateful to be part of this as well. And I think as I've participated in this series on and off, or at least observed it, I've just been really impressed by the breadth and depth of the thoughts, and I'm excited to be part of it today.
Yeah, great. Thanks, David. And so if you're interested in the programs or they'll put in the chat links to the different organizations and things that we're mentioning all throughout the day. They'll get more information around all of that. So we're going to jump in and we're going to begin with Diana, and then Fyodor is going to go second, and then David will go third. And I was talking with Diana about how much I appreciate our connection, and she's been an inspiration to me in many ways. And one of the most important ways, probably the most important way I could cry, is the group behind me. So we sat one time out in a grassy place, and we sat there. And you can go ahead and just leave Diane and I here, and then take me away when she speaks. We sat in this grassy place, and it was at a retreat. I believe it might have been Barrett Kohler or something like that. And Diana brought out her peace pipe and sat there with me, and we talked and chatted. And I was a single guy figuring out what's next in my life. You know, what do I want to do? What matters most? And we talked about family and the desire for love in my life, you know, and those kinds of things. And she inspired, encouraged, and talked to me about it. There were a few others in my pathway that did that as well. Dinah, you were one of the important ones on that journey. So thank you for that. Your contributions to the field and our work is, you know, immeasurable, and your commitment and generosity is big. So I'm just really grateful that you're here today. Thank you. It's been a while since we've seen each other, and so I'm really glad to kind of connect through this forum here with you today. I'll turn it over to you, and then you can share with us what you'd like to share, and then we'll bring it over to Theodore and David after that. So, Diana.
Thank you, Steve. I love that introduction. It's such a great example of the whole theme of your think tanks, the human connection, the humanness of our lives. And I would much rather be introduced in that way than my long list of publications and organizations that I've founded. But I will say that those of you who know me and those of you who may have read my work know that my work is about appreciative inquiry with a focus on large-scale change and transformation. So my work is grounded in relationships. It's grounded in meaning making that people do together. And it's grounded in a deep belief that the way we change is that we move to something that is life compelling, that we don't change away from things. I mean, we could hear about problems, we could be told what's wrong, and we are living in the midst of times that are, by all definitions, problematic for many people. But change happens when people see the possibility and the path forward to something more life-giving. And that's what appreciative inquiry is about. Today, I want to talk about what when I teach, I like to say one of our primary tasks is to cross the appreciative threshold, to go through whether it's a long tunnel or a flowery bridge, but to get on the other side from problems to the appreciative. And that is work that we do, whether we call it spiritual work, whether it's psychological work, but we each in our own maturity get to a point where we realize that living in a world of problems doesn't change things, that we've got to get to the other side. As Tom White, one of our clients when we worked with Verizon, said, appreciative inquiry solves problems, it just does it from the other side. So I want to talk about what I mean when I say appreciative, because so many people think, oh, it means complimenting people, it means giving recognition. Yeah, that's part of it, but it's a much bigger set of capacities than just nice job. It has to do with being able to see and speak the language of strengths, recognizing that in all of our unique and wondrous differences, we all have strengths. We have things that we can do, that we love to do, that we're good at, and we have things that we're not so good at. And the management theories of the past have been to try to develop people in what they're not good at. And the education or the pedagogy has been, let's develop kids in everything. And what we've learned more recently is that if we develop children and we develop people in areas of their strength, one, they feel better about themselves, their performance increases, and they then start to improve in other areas. So appreciative inquiry could be said to be strength-based. I have a client, a CEO client, who had a very problematic chief of staff. This person could not manage people. She was getting feedback that was not good. He picked her up out of that job, put her in a new position where she doesn't have anybody reporting to her. She's thinking business strategy. She's out talking to the public and helping set up local areas. And she's thriving. And her colleagues are wanting to now be around her. They're wanting to give her more work. They're wanting to collaborate. But when she was in a position that was counter to her strengths, nobody wanted to work with her. She couldn't do it. And so making those moves sometimes are challenging, and believing that it's okay to have people be in their comfort zone working from their strengths. That's part of it. Another part of it is to be able to see what works well and to be able to speak in terms of what's working well. We are so conditioned and educated to identify problems. And in fact, if you're the one who sees a problem, you probably get a pat on the back. And what we are not good at, and we must develop the capacities personally and collectively, is to be able to see that's working well. Oh, we can replicate it. We can adapt it to our situation. We can make it better because it's a success pattern, a high performance pattern in people, a best practice in organizations. So appreciative inquiry is looking for, doing inquiry to find best practices and to magnify them, amplify them. Yes, it's about compliments, but it's also about what you want more of, which sometimes takes courage. So often in large organizations and communities, people are going along with, and instead of saying, here's what I believe we can do, here's what I want more of. Another part of appreciative inquiry is to be able to find and give people the images of what's working well. Because again, the human brain does not register the negative. I want to share with you something quite personal. I've moved into a large apartment condominium, and our front desk lady is delightful. And her communication style is to tell us what's wrong. And she's very frustrated because she's not getting compliance. So here was an email I got yesterday. No large items of any kind, washers, dryers, sofas, recliner chairs, bicycles, moving boxes are to be moved through the front lobby door. Now that message leaves us with the image of large items. It leaves us with the image of the front door. And so it really tells our brains to bring large items through the front door. It doesn't tell us what to do instead. And this is something that we've got to really learn how to say. In this case, it's exciting that everybody's getting new furniture or bicycles. Deliveries, please bring them through the basement. I'm happy to open the basement door for anyone bringing in a delivery. The being able to speak in the affirmative image of what we want is essential. Now, why is this all important? Why is it important that we cross this appreciative threshold, that we learn to communicate, to think about, and to communicate with one another in these affirmative, appreciative ways? One, it is essential for our collective nervous system. We are all interconnected. We breathe the same air. We live on the same planet. We are one interconnected nervous system. And our nervous systems feel safe in environments of positivity and possibility and images of what works. So we create a safe space collectively. The second is that there was research a long time ago. People were asked, how did you overcome all of the challenges in your life? Because we all have many challenges. And over again, people said, there was one person who believed in me more than I believed in myself. It might have been a grandparent. It might have been a coach. It might have been a church leader. But people who were successful had that one or two people that believed in them. For me, as you may know, I've written numerous books. And when I was in high school, my high school yearbook advisor asked me to be the editor of the yearbook. I had no idea why I was asked to do that. I loved it. I still have my high school yearbook with me. And as I went on to write books and publish books, I realized he saw in me something that I didn't know back then, but it really did plant seeds that helped me move forward into my future. So we want to be that person for others. We want to be the one who can see in someone what they don't yet see in themselves. And we want to be able to give people clear images. So Steve has been instrumental for years in creating the organization and change programs. And he knows, he has images of a master's degree, of a PhD program. Other people can come and study those programs now because of the social architecture Steve has put in place. And we need to find those social innovators, those social architects, and listen to them. And one of the things that I think is so important that we understand, innovation lives on the edge, right? Every innovator in the hard sciences, in the soft sciences, has always been sort of put aside because they're not mainstream. We have got to be curious about the edge, the edginess, the maybe just crazy ideas, but there might be something in it that is going to be essential for our future because it's new and possible. So being able to recognize what's working. Now, appreciative inquiry. Appreciative, I've talked a lot about it. But if you were to ask me which is more important, appreciative or inquiry, I might say inquiry. Because if I am in a space of inquiry, I am curious, I am open to learning, and I'm open to understanding what matters to other people and why the world is the way it is. And so it's inquiry that takes me out into the world to learn, to see. And it's the appreciation or the appreciative that lets me give the gift of strengths and success to other people and the world. So the combination of appreciative inquiry for me is magical. Now, how am I doing time-wise here?
I think you're doing fine if you have a couple more minutes or so.
A couple more minutes. Okay.
Yeah.
So I have talked about appreciative inquiry at a very personal level, because I think there is a call for all of us now to move in that direction and to bring it into whatever work you do. But appreciative inquiry is also a process for very large scale change and transformation. It's a way of bringing people together to let them interview each other. You know, we don't get in the middle of the relationships. We help foster them. Members of an organization interviewing each other to discover their strengths. Being in groups to collaboratively imagine an even better future. I mean, I chuckled because one of our clients many years ago was Hunter Douglas window fashions, curtains and shades. And during the dream activity, there were a group of people in the company sitting around, and they were pretending they were watching a sports on television, a sports game. And they're changing the channel. And somebody says, "Oh, the sun is coming in. It's in our eyes. Where's the remote for the shades?" And guess what? That was the invention of a new product, because they had never before imagined shades, window curtains that could go up and down on a remote. Well, I moved into my new apartment 4 months ago, and guess what I have? Hunter Douglas remote window shades. And I just thought it was fabulous. I mean, things come full circle around. So when we dream in specifics, not just big value-based dreams, but dreams that are actionable. And that's one of the things I love about appreciative inquiry. Yes, we want to bring our values and our inspiration and our ideas, but we want to do it in ways that are specific, tangible, and actionable. So we can move from dream into the actual design. And in the case of the remote window shades, the design of the window shades, the design of the marketing plan, the design of the production process, everything that was needed to make that a reality. And then we move into what we call destiny, or doing it. And so the appreciative inquiry process is really a way of supporting the people whose organization or community it is to come together to change their conversation. I don't focus on changing people. I don't want anybody to try to change me, but I do put a lot of emphasis on changing the conversation, because the words that we use make a difference. They inform what we can do. They inform who we can become. So appreciative inquiry brings people together and gives them the opportunity to participate in categorically different conversations that will lead them to categorically different results, things that they want in their lives. So I think that's all I have to say, Steve. Thank you.
Very poignant. That's awesome. Thank you. That was wonderful. Very,
you.
very nice. Yeah. So what we'll do is we'll take a minute and breathe that in, and Fyodor will join us here and share a little bit himself, and then we'll go with Diana. Thank you so much, and we'll be able to come back and talk with you more at the end. So Fyodor, so welcome. Tell me a little bit about what brought you here today with us, and why you said yes to coming.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. That's actually a funny story, because when I first received an invitation, I kind of treated that as one of many of those that might be like scammy or something, because it's like out of the blue, like, I'm Tom. It's like, okay, what is that? And I didn't spend a lot of time looking into that at some point, but then something was not right, and I came back to it. It's like, okay, who's this guy, Steve? And let me search my mailbox. And then I found out that you and I actually met at the Academy of Management more than 10 years ago, when I was on the executive committee of the entrepreneurship division, and I was working on the Entrepreneurship Practice Award, and then I was joining the practice team committee, and then we didn't spend a lot of time together. That's why I didn't remember you. But that was clearly a connection and shared context. Like, yeah, actually, Organizational Development and Change Division, Academy of Management. Yeah, there's actually a very interesting context. And that's when I wrote to you. And actually, it was late, I think. It was past the deadline. It was like, hey, I'm available.
Yeah.
So, yeah, come and talk.
Yeah, I'm so glad it worked. I'm so glad it worked out, and I'm glad we were able to connect. So yes, and your background is quite interesting. I love this evolutionary futures orientation that you bring. And I'm sure that that's going to be connected to what you're going to share with us today. So I'll turn it over to you and just share with us what you'd like to share with us.
No, absolutely. Thank you. And it was wonderful to listen to Diana. And I really appreciate how Diana started with relationality and people coming together, and then ended with not changing people, changing conversation. I think this is very much connected to things that I want to talk about today as well. And just for context, at Evolution Futures Lab, we support learning and collective action for systems transformation, primarily in community context, not large organizations, right? So what I will be sharing and examples that I'll be sharing are primarily around place-based systems change or community. Yeah, but I think it might be valuable for organizational development practitioners as well to maybe borrow some perspectives or practices from a very closely related field. So there are two things I wanted to focus on today. One is the reminder of the importance of context, and the power of context. And the second is sensing being a transformative process, because very often we look at sensing as data collection or extraction of data. And I wanted to look at sensing as a process that in itself bears the potential for transformation. Context. I remember when I was in my teen years back in the 1990s, I read the book by Miguel Ángel Asturias, Mr. President. That's a fiction based on the experience of Guatemalan dictatorship in the 1920s. And in this book, there is a fascinating description of people who are suffering from the system, the social system. They're suffering from the system, they hate it, but they support it with everything they do, because the system makes them support the self. And for me, it was a fascinating reading at that point. It had nothing to do with my reality, but I kind of remembered it emotionally. And then I started seeing that reality more and more in Russia. I grew up in Russia, and I saw the political transformation in the 2000s. And the book didn't give any answers. It's like, this is tragic, this is how it works, and there is no solution. So that's what actually drove me towards systems change through the work of Adam Kahane and transformative scenario planning. I was like, yeah, actually there is an opportunity to transform that, and let's changing the possibilities, bringing people together. There's a multi-stakeholder dialogue. I thought that, yeah, great. Let's just let me find mentors, let me learn from people, and let's go to Peter Senge, and let's go to Adam Kahane. That's just my Evolutionary Futures Lab co-founder, Manuel Manga, worked with Adam and Peter for a long time in different projects, and I learned a lot from him. And I also realized, no, it's not an easy way, because everybody knows what's happening in Russia now. And part of my work was with Russian civil society, like in parallel with what I do globally, and in the United States. But it's been fascinating to see just how powerful the context is. And to see a lot of brave people, smart people, very ethical people failing, trying to do all kinds of things to confront that context, or to change that context, or to create different alternatives, right? So context is super important. It's not everything. But like, I had to counterbalance that. I remember when we were moving to a different apartment here in the United States, we invited people for a home warming party, and there were two parties, because one time didn't work for everybody. And then there were like drinks and refreshments, and the first group of people comes and goes directly to drinks and refreshments, starts talking with each other. People didn't know each other before, but now they're talking, and it's very vibrant conversation, great energy, and that's how the evening started. The second group, people come here, they go straight to the sofa and the chairs, they sit, like, hey everybody, drinks, refreshments, we need a circle. Guess which group had more organizational development professionals in it? The second one, right? So because the context was similar, exactly the same setup, exactly the same invitation, but who came mattered, right? So I don't want to say that context is everything. Definitely, who is in that context matters, but also context is very, very important. And one interesting thing about context is that we are living in multiple contexts all the time. And there are levels of those contexts, and those levels are very subjective in the form of, like, in the way that we set them. It's a continuum. There's no, like, one context is an organization, another context is kind of national context, another context is global context. It's all abstraction, right? Contexts are fluid, and they kind of turn one into another, and they overlap. But at the same time, there is certain hierarchy of scales as well. And in my work, one thing I found very important is to pay attention to which level of context I'm engaging in. And always, whatever this level is, there is larger context that I'm not engaging in, but I need to be mindful of that context because it's powerful and because it shapes a lot of things. And similarly with the entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs that engage in place-based systemic change that we are working with, we always are aware of the larger context that shapes what they can or cannot do. And of course, this is not everything, and they can design consciously some wiggle room, right? And that's what the work is all about. But at the same time, also, we need to be aware of that context. And one example of that is funding systems, for example. We see a lot of local leaders doing wonderful systemic work intuitively. They're doing amazing things. And they, when we look at that using different frameworks, like this is just amazing. But then they go to get funding, they go to get some mentorship, and what they get is very often something that is inconsistent from our based on our understanding. It's inconsistent with the good work they're doing, right? One example is when I was on a brain trust of United Nations Capital Development Fund. They had a program supporting organizations in the small enterprises in the poorest communities of poorest countries to achieve sustainable development goals. And the idea was that there is a kind of funding gap between microfinancing and private investment because the cost of capital is too high because of the risks involved in those poorest communities of poorest countries. So in those small enterprises, kind of micro entrepreneurs that can be supported by microfinance, never grow, and yet they provide essential services for the community. They create jobs, they generate income. So in order to help those communities achieve sustainable development goals, we need to support those organizations. So far, so good. So the way they supported that was through blended capital. So they selected high potential entrepreneurs, they gave them grants, then they gave them blended loans. Like if a private lender comes and lends at 30%, for example, which is unaffordable, the UN steps in with 1% loan, and which results with 10, 15%, depending on the ratio, and that's more affordable. Then they do blended investment, and the end goal in the pipeline is 100% private investment. So taking these micro entrepreneurs and preparing them for 100% private investment at the end. So my question, I had two questions for them. I said, first, what are you doing to support those organizations in staying local or benefiting local community once they get 100% private investment? Because you didn't change anything in the community. You supported one organization, but the corruption is still there, the infrastructure, lack of infrastructure is still there, the risks are still there. What will make them stay? There's no answer, right? And the second one is that, okay, so what about other organizations that create essential services for the community and that are super vital, but they will never be eligible for 100% private investment just because of the nature of what they do and the nature of those organizations? And of course, one program shouldn't be doing everything, but at least recognizing its role and its limitations, and also coordinate efforts with other programs that address issues from multiple angles. Again, there is no answer. So, and then that context, and that is something that is very powerful. If you take a local community and then you have resources pouring into this community, right? Those resources choose specific types of organizations and they support them in specific ways. And this has a potential to actually contributing to brain drain while subsidizing the profits of private lenders and private investors. So that is the power of context. So how do we transform that kind of context? And if we choose to engage at that level, we can transform those funding systems. And this will allow for natural emergence of systemic entrepreneurship locally. At the same time, we also can work with local communities directly and create alternative funding mechanisms so that those organizations don't have to rely on programs from the United Nations Capital Development Fund, right? So there are multiple ways to approach that, but the key idea that is important to me is recognizing the importance of context, and whenever we're deciding to engage with it, recognizing that there is a larger context that we're not changing, and how can we actually design something that would allow community or organization or people stay within that larger context. And the second is transformative sensing. So when we bring people together, and to design that kind of thing that relates to those contexts. We don't do interviews. Like I remember also, one methodology that was presented to me included doing interviews, then doing systemic map, and then providing the systemic map to the client with anthropologically informed strategies on how to launch a new product or service to the market. And that was heartbreaking for me, because you're not actually sharing the data with the community. You're not creating space for people to come together. And this is when a lot of things happen. Like Nora Bateson talks about a funny poiesis, which is the way in which life coalesces towards vitality in unseen ways. And a lot of things that you do when you bring people together, you will never measure, you will never see. But it's so important for them to be together. This Entrepreneurship Practice Award is a collective effort of past division chair, new members, past members, and different ones. And that's why we were able to do it in 4 months instead of 2 years that it usually takes to get a new award. People coming together makes wonders. And then sensing is not just about collecting data, collecting information. Sensing is about being together. And because of the nature of social reality, that is, in Searle's worlds, ontologically subjective. So if we stop believing in this wall behind me, nobody can pass through the wall because it's observer independent. It's material reality. But if we all stop believing in money, there is no money. That means that conversation in itself, shifting conversation, is an act of transformation. And this brings me back to what Diana was talking about, changing conversation, having categorically differing conversations. So when we bring people together and allow them to figure that out in a space that's nurturing, in a space that is appreciative, right? We're also helping them change the context. And by helping them change the context, we allow a lot of emergence in different subsystems of that system we're working in. And with that, thank you very much. And I'm done here.
Fyodor, thank you. That was really good. And I saw Diana up there shaking her head a lot of times as you were talking. And same with David. They were both acknowledging, I think, a lot of people. But I think I like the connection. That's really great. Thank you for sharing that. The story, the context of your story is pretty powerful. So thank you. Yeah, it's really good. And so we can bring David in. And there's David. David, and it's really great to have you here today. Thanks again for all the support for what we're doing. And David and I go way back, sort of way back, seems like way back. We've had lots of great conversations. I just love our conversations. We have been conspiring to help create a better world through the field of organization development and change. And so I count myself very fortunate to know you and for you to trust me to be a friend of yours in that endeavor. So I'm really grateful. David is also at Wright State and has done a lot there to keep that university going. The United States has faced a lot of what's called the enrollment cliff, and we've had lots of challenges. And David is one of the people at Wright State that helped keep that university going and able to thrive, hopefully, in the future as it keeps going and so forth. And then same thing with the OD&C division. Your work with that has been very important. So I'm really, really glad that you're here today. You've been doing a lot to help support the program. Now we get to hear from you, right? And hear what you think and what your thoughts are on what's your hot topic, because you've been doing so much leading. It'll be fun to sit and hear you talk a little bit about some of your passions. So I'll turn it over to you and share with us what your latest thinking is.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. I reciprocate those feelings. I admire Steve so much. The more I learn about Steve, the more I realize he's just a force of nature and pushing us to move forward. And he's also a force of nature in connecting. I think he's a master connector. I don't know that I've met many people who are as good at fostering connections as Steve, and this whole series is an example of that. So I'm going to talk briefly about a topic that I have been working on for quite a number of years. And there are many threads to this, but I'm actually just going to boil it down to something very precise, which is how to help organizations to define their values. And so it's a pretty, in contrast to the way I typically think, which is about grand, huge ideas and things that are probably impossible to fully complete. This one's pretty packaged in the sense that I've been working for many years with organizations using a lot of the processes that we already heard about. And Diana, I really admire your work on appreciative inquiry and I'm also a practitioner of appreciative inquiry in pretty much everything I do. So this is a really specific application of appreciative inquiry to help an organization to be clear about and articulate values. I've titled my presentation From Individual Virtues to Organizational Values, a process for values-based organizing. Probably should shift this to virtues-based organizing. And just to give you a little bit of background on me, I have been part of the Positive Organizational Scholarship community, which is kind of centered at the University of Michigan for many, many years. Pretty much since its founding. I was there in 2000, I think it was 2003 or 2001 when the very first POS conference was held. And I kind of watched that movement grow. And I'm not like at the center of that work, but I've just been part of that general orientation. And I have a PhD from the Case Western Reserve University Weatherhead School of Management, which is kind of a hotbed of OD and leadership development work. And so I had again, I feel very blessed that I had the chance to work with David Cooperative and Richard Boyatzis and Ron Fry and through that network, others like Frank Barrett and Diana like 2 degrees removed and and others. So it's just been I've really been grateful to have that experience. And then I did my dissertation on the meaning of forgiveness in the workplace. And I did that at Roadway Trucking Company, which is a very interesting case study on the use of appreciative inquiry. It was appreciative inquiry used there over a 5-year period of time to literally transform that organization from a very conflict-oriented culture to a collaborative culture. And you could tell a myriad of stories and about all of that and what happened in the long run there. And then I've just done appreciative inquiry-based consulting and facilitation throughout my career ever since then. And then most recently, as Steve was talking about, I've been part of the Organization Development and Change leadership team for about 8 years now. I was the division chair for a year, and now I'm currently serving as the operating officer for the division, and we're making hopefully lots of positive changes to invite more engagement and kind of a new direction. So what I want to talk about is kind of very quickly, my journey from forgiveness to the dimensions of virtues, to virtues and values in organizations, and how we think about what people hold near and dear to them. And this is really connected to what Steve has been working on as far as what it means to be quintessentially human. And much of the work that I'm going to talk about comes from a philosophical lens. So I'll just describe my research journey for a moment. I think it'll help you to connect the dots for me. So back in 2005, when I finished my dissertation, I discovered in this trucking company that there were three dominant narratives about what forgiveness means. And if you want the details, you can go read some of the articles I wrote back then. But in essence, there was a begrudging response, what I call a pragmatic response or narrative, and then a transcendent narrative. And the begrudging narrative was essentially that forgiveness is a nice idea, but it's part of our bargaining context. And so, if I'm going to forgive or give up my right to be angry, that needs to come with some conditions, right? So, forgiveness is a nice idea, but in principle, we probably don't do it very much. That would be one narrative. A second narrative would be pragmatic, which is I'd call this just the I have to live narrative. It's a cost and benefit narrative, where if I don't forgive, I have to live with this supervisor who's done something that's really frustrated me or been very offensive. And if I take that home, the costs are too high. I have to find a way to get over the negative experiences I've had or whatever's going on with me. So the costs of holding on to a grudge or holding on to anger or hurt are too high. And so I suppress those feelings and emotions. And then the third narrative was a narrative of transcendence. And in this, forgiveness is a transformational life choice, and it's a life practice. And in this understanding of forgiveness, we embrace those difficult relational experiences and we learn from them, and we use them as opportunities to transform both self and relationships, and sometimes even the people around us. So it's a very different understanding of what forgiveness means. So what fascinated me about this is that there's so many different ways in which that single word could be unpacked, each of which has like a self-contained logic and system of understanding and meaning that justifies it. And so from there, I began to explore, well, what are virtues? And just in general, what does it mean when we say we're developing a virtue? And this led me down about a 20-year journey of trying to explore the kind of the connections between positive organizational scholarship and the philosophical virtue ethics literature, and some tensions between those two ways of understanding the world. And so this is just a quick synopsis of what a virtue is or can be. It's a habitual and cultivated disposition to think, feel, and act in ways that promote human flourishing, which is the connection here to, Steve's work on what it means to be quintessentially human. When we develop our virtues, we're developing our humanity. We're developing some understanding of what it means to be excellent in the human condition. And from that perspective, virtues integrate thought, cognition, emotion or affect, and behavior, what we do, as a kind of a holistic way of building excellence in both our lives as part of our character and in society and in the environment around us. And from this perspective, virtue becomes a second nature to us. It becomes a second nature trait because it becomes so part of us as human beings that that becomes intrinsic to who we are in our character. So this exploration, as I started looking at different connotations of various virtues, sort of led me to realize that the research on virtues, be whatever they may be, we're talking about compassion, courage, humility, forgiveness, drive, etc. The definitional work on this and how it's been studied in context is like all over the place, and oftentimes with counterintuitive findings like too much forgiveness leads to dysfunctional marriage, or too much optimism can lead to bad organizational outcomes, or too much happiness can lead to misery. And I'm like, how do we get studies that would support those kinds of conclusions? And what I realized, as I worked with others, is that it's because in social science we tend to fractionalize things, particularly when you're looking at it from a positivist perspective. And so, most recently, and just last month, I finally published a paper that encapsulates all of this. If you want to read it, I'd be excited to share it with you. But my colleague Jason Stansberry, and with help from Brad Wynn, we have been working on this paper for about 10 years to define sort of the dimensionality of what a virtue entails. So it's holistic, beneficial, meaning that there are outcomes or goods that are present because we cultivate that virtue, both individually or culturally. Situational, meaning that we need to understand context. And then characteristic becomes second nature. So I'm going to quickly translate that to how we might explore virtues in an organizational context. So a virtue becomes organizational when it becomes a cultural norm, when it becomes part of the system itself. Well, so this could be in terms of shared behaviors, leadership practices. It finds its way into strategic decision making and so forth. And where we most see this in our organizations is in the values, or the defined values of an organization. And so I've been part of several efforts now to define the values of an organization. And what I want to share with you is kind of where I see us using these 4 principles I just talked about to do that work. And so, in essence, we use these 4 principles to understand the holism of the virtues, where we label and define and for purposes of defining values, organizational values, I am using a virtues-based lens, recognizing that there are really 2 different kinds of values when we talk about organizational values. And one of those is a virtues-based value, which tend to focus on the character or the culture of the organization. And the other is what I'd call operational values, which focus more on the ends or purposes of the organization. So I'm specifically talking about virtues-based values here. So we would label and define the value, describe the benefits that should be present if that value is being practiced at its very highest level within the organization. We identify the expected behaviors that we would typically want to see and reinforce and celebrate. And then identify also the corresponding or supporting character traits in people that we would want to see. So I've used that process, or that lens, that end, that goal, to shape several facilitated processes to help an organization get to and articulate their values. We do that through an appreciative inquiry based process that includes at least 4 phases. So one is discovering, and I'm sure Diana will recognize those high point stories. We want to identify examples of the organization when it's at its best, and then almost as a right away can unpack those stories and say, well, what are the values that are represented in those stories when we are at our best? And so you do a brainstorming exercise that's grounded in those high point stories, creating usually large lists of potential values that can then be sorted into general themes. And we then work with a smaller group to steer this process. Those themes are validated and then translated into documents that align with what I just shared. And then we talk about how to operationalize those. So that would be the kind of a longer term process for how to do this. And one example of this is where I did this work in a credit union. I actually did it twice because I did it before a merger, before they knew they were going to merge, and then did it right as a merger was taking place, where they're using this process to help integrate the cultures of these two organizations. And so at the end, what we had was a document that had the virtues, and we actually unpacked the meaning of these virtues so that we had a kind of a statement about what the value is. And it's and obviously it's too small probably for you to see, but so we have a label, a definition, we talk about and articulate the benefits, our expected behaviors, and what we're trying to help people to be, not just do, but be as human beings in that context. And I'll quickly share the document that, yeah, here we go. And so when you see the whole thing, and again, I can't do justice to it in the time I've got, but you can see we also did some vision and mission work with it, but here were their values. And then for each value, we had a definition. Why is this value essential for us? What do we expect? And what are the character traits that we expect from people? So, and we do that for all 4 of the values that they created. What this does is it helps us to actually translate value statements into strategic, operational, and actionable ideas. And that can find their way into strategic planning, as well as every aspect of cultural encouragement that we would want to promote within an organization. So I will leave it there. Well, actually, I think I will just share this one last thing. One of the things I've observed.
So David, let's hold it. Let's hold it.
Okay.
Okay, only because I want you to be able to share it later because we want to give people some time.
Okay, I'll stop there.
You'll be able to share this in a few minutes. So thank you. This is great, and lots of connections there. So we have a breakout room. So Lisa, thank you, Lisa. Where are you? And if you could stop sharing, David, that'd be great. So Lisa is our producer, director, and keeping us all organized. So Lisa, thank you so much for all that you're doing to help us have a really good session today. If you can go ahead and send people to breakout, we're going to take about 5 minutes to talk about what your reactions are, what your questions are, so we can have some time to bring your questions back. So why don't you go meet some new people, make some friends, and we'll bring you back and bring some questions back that you'd love to ask, maybe connecting some dots between our group of guests here today. So again, have some fun, make a friend. And David, you don't have to go. Diana, you don't go. Fyodor, you don't go. You stay right here. Okay, there we go. All right. So what do you all think? What did you hear? What was resonating with you from each other? And just have a chat with each other right now.
David, thank you. That is such a great example of appreciative inquiry. It's really tangible. It's really great. And I resonated, of course, with Fyodor about the relational perspective and the importance of language and narrative, which then, David, you also talked about your narratives of forgiveness, which was really meaningful. So I love those. Those are a couple things.
Yeah, and I talked a little bit about what resonated in Diana's speech, and of course, appreciative inquiry is something that one of the first things I learned when I was entering the field, and meeting legends from the field is very special. I was like, when I was looking at Diana's here, it's like, oh my God. So, such a pleasure. And David, will we get your presentation? Some people in the chat were asking that as well. So because I want to dive into the last slide and more, if possible.
Yeah. Sure. I'd be happy to share.
Thank you.
Me
Happy
too.
to share. Yeah, and thank you for stopping me, Steve.
It's all right. It's all good. It's all good. All good.
Definitely easy to lose track of time, but no, I also I resonate so much with Diana's work. I have known of and cited your work. I think we've had a conversation or two here and there.
Right.
But particularly on your discussion on appreciation or appreciative, I've also done a fair bit of, well, I haven't really written a lot about it in a couple of places about my interpretation of appreciation and appreciative. And now, I mean, I'm like looking at it through the lens of what I just shared. Like you can look at appreciation as when we say that someone is appreciative, that's a virtue. And so, what is the whole of the virtue? What is what is it that we would expect to see when someone, internalize that, or when an organization does, so you can really unpack it using the lens I just shared. And Fyodor, I'm just fascinated by the work you're doing, and would love to learn a little more. So anyway, those are my quick reactions.
I think the one thing that for me is really essential in these three conversations is that when we're working in the field of change, we're working at the individual level and the relational collective level. I think, Fyodor, your emphasis on context is so essential because it moves us out of the individualistic mode to understand. And I love the multiple contexts. For me, with the Taos Institute, we talk about multiple identities as opposed to the one individualistic identity. And yet I started out talking about our strengths, and that's considered an individual capacity. And so we're all on that spectrum of individual, relational, collective, and how do we work it? I was surprised, David, and I want to challenge you to take your work on forgiveness, which is narrative based, and talk about the narratives of virtues and values. What happens in a value based organization? How do the narratives show up of those values? How do they live? I think there's something really rich that will push the field in that way.
David, I'd love to talk maybe later about our collective narrative methodology to track those changes in narratives around things. But that's for later.
Yeah. I in the context, I want to understand more how you think of context and its relationship to cultures, and they're very rich. Thank you, Steve. I also want to point out that we all three wore the same color today. Just saying.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Diana, for me, the way that I have grasped on appreciation as an operational idea is that it simultaneously helps people to see the good while also expanding the social capital, the capacity of people to work together to accomplish common aims. It does that at the same time. And so in that sense, it appreciates the social capital that exists within the system. And that's a very tangible idea and for me, the inquiry is any inquiry-based process that does that is appreciative inquiry.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that means there's a lot of processes and practices that are appreciative inquiry that we don't label as such, right? But they are a form of appreciative inquiry.
Right.
Yeah, and bring Diana and Theodora and David back into the big screen here for just a second. And would love to have you all just maybe open up with one question, then we'll bring questions in. But just one quick question is, you all kind of alluded to the health of this type of thinking, the healthiness of it. Could you speak a little bit to how this work can be healing for the person, not just receiving the work, but the person doing the work, and the potential for it to be foreign because people might not recognize the need to take care of themselves? Can you speak a little bit to the people doing this work, why it's so important that they do this work? Then maybe we can open up to answers, questions out for the group as well. And then Lisa, when they're finished chatting a little bit about this, bring everybody in and we'll do some Q&A.
All done? I think you're all done.
Ooh, somebody's off. Mute somebody. There you go. Could you speak to that a little bit? So one of you,
I'd be happy to kick that off. I know this happens through, and as we were just talking, with Diana, any appreciative inquiry based process or oriented process, it has a dialogic element to it, which it builds into it a connecting, a sharing at a fundamental human level, that just that very action tends to create healing for people. And that's especially true in organizations or in systems where there have been significant rifts or factions, and you get people together who rarely would talk with one another otherwise, and they may come with their preconceived biases or judgments about, people from that department or this area of the organization think this way or whatever. And then all of those judgments, those narratives are challenged as they get to know somebody at a human level. And I think that's a profoundly powerful thing to witness. Diana, how does that align with your experience?
Well, I want to tie it into something Fyodor said, because he talked about how they don't do interviews. And I heard him say, we don't do it to people. And one of the things with appreciative inquiry is we do it with people. And there's a huge difference in the field of change between thinking you're the expert and you're going to do it and you're going to know and you're going to get somebody's data and you're going to use it, or you're going to let people have conversations about their own world. The healing for me comes, and Steve, this will be another trip down memory lane, because this was a conversation I had years and years ago with Kathy Dannemiller. Organization development is a field that I love because we are held accountable for our own personal growth. We can only help a system as much as we've done our own work. And so that powerful relationship between we're a part of the context. Once we sign on, we're as much a part of that context with our clients as anybody else is. And the extent to which we've done our own healing enables us to help others heal, whether it's to create good generative questions or whether it's to be there while they have a forgiveness process. And that also means that their process is going to influence us. If we aren't influenced by our work, we're not there yet. We got a bigger world to step into. So I think understanding that we're working with people and that we're a part of it as they're going through a process, we also must be going through a process.
Yeah, this is beautiful. Thank you, Diana and David. So for me, two quick things. One is about the healing question. A few years ago, my best friend from high school visited us in California, and he asked, like, how are you doing here? It's a new culture, it's a different culture. I've heard Americans are competitive and it's like kind of hard. It's like, okay, come and look at our community. And we invited him to just a community gathering, and he's like, oh, I see you're home. So these multi-year relationships, this deep alignment, right? This is healing. This can help you create your own mini context, right? That is very healing. But on the other hand, the burnouts, right, which is very real in change work. And one of the reasons it happens from my perspective is misalignment with context or lack of attention to context. And it's just like when there is a dictatorship and you're just trying to walk into the street and say, this is bad, and then you got shot. Yeah, this is like the extreme metaphor of burnout. Yeah. So when you go out there and you just like try to ignore that context, it hits back and it's very powerful. So, for example, that's why, for example, when we when we work with social entrepreneurs who are deeply committed to systems change, we don't want to charge them money for what we do for them. The more value we create for people, the more that we want to give them money. That's why we have collaborative funding arm. We make revenue on low context work with institutional clients who actually have large budgets. But people who are deeply committed to change, we want to create context for them that helps them create resilience in the face of like the modern society, and still do the work. And so I guess it's very important to just pay attention to that.
Yeah, thanks, Fyodor. And bring everybody in. And if you could raise your hand or just wave your hand in the little thing. Would you like to come in and say hi and ask a question or share a reflection? Jess Paul.
Thank you, Steve. We had a short but very interesting discussion in the breakout room. And we were, of course, recalling all the key themes the speakers have brought out. But in the chat, Ryan had raised one of the comments saying, so where are the boundaries and who creates them? And in our breakout, we were sort of discussing how underexplored, perhaps, is this notion of boundaryness in the interconnected world we live in, as we heard from the speakers. And this interconnected world has multiple layers in it, systems within systems. And there is a whole art form called complex adaptive systems. So the question for the speakers and for all of us, have we been undermining the so-called boundaries? And could we do more if we were to perhaps add a dimension of flourishing, life affirming, or any other prefix to explore these so-called boundaries?
Jasper, I think I was just looking at your comment. I think you were suggesting that we add an adjective to OD. OD&C.
Yeah. All the so-called generic subjects, would they benefit from an adjective? At least to encourage the discussion and debate.
Right.
Steve, I want to respond first to the comment in the chat, because while I am delighted that everything that we're doing in terms of humanistic and human, I want to also remind us that we're living in a natural world, and that let's not, take everything as if it's our human domain without understanding all of those interrelationships. The question of boundaries is fascinating. From a social constructionist point of view, we would say that boundaries are created in our dialogues among those we're in relationship with. Perhaps we learn them as children, context, culture. We grow up learning some boundaries, not other boundaries. And then boundaries get created in dialogue. And so I think it's a very important question to bring conversations about boundaries into our organizational work. Are we living in the boundaries created by predecessors? Or have we created our boundaries based on our virtues and values to link into David's work, because values can be very essential to the social architecture of an organization and the boundaries that we create. So just important consideration, lots for us all to think about.
So enlightening, Diana. Thank you.
Hey, Mike. Yeah, come on in. You're on mute, so click on the unmute. I'll get there.
Yeah. One of the things that strikes me about all these presentations and our discussion is that we have not really focused a lot on the practical question that most CEOs or leaders ask is, how do I, which is what are the outcomes of my organization? How do we think about, we focused on process or one element of an organization such as values. I thought the closest we got was with context, but again, we didn't talk about outcomes. What is the way in which we can help organizations improve outcomes as they define it? Not as we define it, but as they define it. And what evidence do we have that any of the ways we've talked about approaching it is improving outcomes of some kind or another? So that's kind of the territory I was in when I was listening to what I was listening to. I thought all these were very interesting, but they were focused on human outcomes, not organizational outcomes. Or at least I didn't hear that explicitly. They were probably embedded, but not explicitly defined. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. I mean, that's the
Gil's trying to get in there.
Well, Lewin certainly would have us, in my work, we focus on the organizational desired outcomes.
Yeah.
And increase the human engagement throughout the system by doing so, while doing so.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The two go together, I think.
Mike, that's in the facilitation work that I do, that's something that has always been front and center for me. And whenever I'm having that conversation, with the leader or CEO, I will always ask, to what end? What are our ultimate goals here? And so while I did not talk about that explicitly in my presentation, that definitely was a very important formative part of every engagement I've done where we've talked about values.
Oh.
And I think values are one of those areas, just my observation, I think they're one of those areas that a lot of leaders understand are important, but they have a very difficult time sort of translating them into something that's operationalizable, right?
Yeah.
And so the process that I've laid out there makes it, when you start seeing that level of detail around what we mean and why it's important to us, then it makes it very tangible. You can do all kinds of operational, strategic activities that help to reinforce the culture that we're trying to build, because that's really what it comes down to.
Mm-hmm.
Virtues-based values are about what we're striving to be as an organization, as a system, from a human perspective, and as individuals working within that system.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, David.
And I would take that, even build on it, because no one calls me, no CEO calls me to make people feel good.
Mm-hmm.
They call me because they're going through a merger, right, and they want people involved.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it's a built-in assumption that we're working toward a set of results. But I think the other thing that's important in response to that question and Gil's thinking is, what is an organization to you? I mean, let's not separate people and organizing. For me, an organization is the complex set of conversations that people have to achieve something that's meaningful to them. So there's no separation between results and process and people and what we call an organization. And I think that's, kind of a starting point as an organizational theorist. What do you mean by organization, organizing? For me, it's a relational process. People are implicit in getting the results they want. I'd love to hear Fyodor's response to this question, because you work in community settings, which also have important results that they want.
Thank you, Dan. And I have some very specific examples. I don't think that we have time there, but I would be very happy to talk with anyone who would like to follow up. And just want to honor that we have 2 minutes and Steve was trying to intervene. But yeah, I do have specific examples and thoughts about outcomes, but also some provocations as well, but for later.
And what's also fun is we have lots more of these Thursdays that go in the future to do more fun connecting with that. I know Ryan had his hand up, and as we watch time, I want to also wrap up with Diana and Fyodor and David, with you just sharing what's your final word of hope for us, or advice for us, or what's your final parting word for us that you'd like us to leave with. And if you all in the chat could write down, what's your takeaway? What's one thing that you took away from today that you found useful or helpful, or that you want to remember? And then I'll turn it over to Ryan if you have something, and then we'll have our guests close out for us.
I think I'll defer a little bit, because I was going to bring in the idea of that there's a talk about, I think Michael brought it in there, the outcomes, right? The immediate thing that I went to was outputs, right? Because the outputs are what come out of the system. And that's what the focus is on. What are we doing here, there? What can we measure, right? What are the complicated things that can be measured? That's what I care about. If I'm speaking from that operational level, but the outcomes and impacts are all squishy. They're all squishy. They're complicated, complex. And and Diana, you said it beautiful. That's not what I get asked to come in. I don't get asked to come in and squish out on the outcomes and impacts. That feels like what you're saying. It starts with the process and the outputs. So that was what I was hoping to kind of go deeper into. And I think the provocation from Fyodor was also one I was hoping to get to, but bottom of the hour.
Yeah, gotcha. Thanks, Ryan. That's all good. Always more time later. So Diana, any parting thoughts for us?
Just thank you for this opportunity. I've wanted to join these conversations for a long time, but in my moving, I didn't have bandwidth. I think we've talked about so many important polarities: individualism versus relational and collaborative. We've talked about process versus results. I mean, my key client right now, CEO, says, we're going to lose $27 million next year, but we are right on track with this process, the transformation we're going through. The board knows that, we know that, and in 27, we're going to be this far ahead. And so we need to be mindful of the multiple contexts, borrowing terms here, and for me, things don't ever end. It's not like we start here and then we end there. We're always in the process of living, of organizing, of achieving, hopefully celebrating. And this has been a wonderful, wonderful time. Thank you, Steve, for inviting me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Fyodor?
Yeah, thank you. I would echo what Diana just said, and also for me, given the story of how I got involved in this that I shared at the beginning. So, Steve, you have a new fan now, so I'm looking forward to attending more of these meetings as a guest. Well, meaning as participant with other speakers, and also reading David's presentation again and again, and diving deeper into that. And I wish I could hear more from the audience, but I also understand the limitations of the format. With that, thank you very much, and I pass it to David.
Just a few words. Thank you. It's been wonderful. And my takeaway, reinforcing process is as important and maybe even more important than outcomes.
Well, thank you, everybody. It's wonderful from the think tank, from Bowling Green State University, the Academy of Management OD&C division, and from all of our guests and all of you who care about a better world for all of us. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.